My man, super excited about this upcoming episode with Ted Shimer. I just want to give a heads up if you have kids in the car or you're listening to this with family members, just a heads up that there is mature content. We're talking through some pretty powerful things that men struggle with, and just want to make sure that you are aware of that. But this episode is super powerful. Absolutely love Ted, his mission, and you're going to have some real gems of tips, not only from a knowledge perspective, but from an action perspective on how to deal with something that a lot of men struggle with.
Yeah, man. And we get into the real problem, the root cause of this issue going on, and how we can fight it and how we can be the best husbands and the best dads, because there is long lasting impacts to this issue if we don't fight it. So tune in, love it, listen, go fill the storehouse.
You're listening to Filling the Storehouse podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Stuart. And we want to walk with you on the journey to living the abundant life through faith, family, and freedom. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours. Together, achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to intentionally fill our storehouse.
Right. Gentlemen, we have a great episode today. I'm really excited about this conversation. Ted, welcome to our show. This is Filling the Storehouse podcast, and we're really excited to have you on today. Thanks for showing up.
Hey, guys. It's good to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah. So if you could tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Well, my story, can start in a lot of places, but I'll start when I was in college. I'd just come to Christ, started following Christ right before my senior year in high school, and went to the University of Arkansas to play football. Got plugged into a campus ministry and just started growing in my faith, and met my wife through the ministry. And so we went on staff with this collegiate ministry in the early 90s. But we started noticing something as a ministry in the mid to early 2000s, that more and more of these college students were struggling with the pornography addiction. So much so that in 2007, we just recognized this need to help men find freedom. And so, ironically, that was in 2007. We thought things were bad then. That was the year the iPhone came out. And so what we thought was a horrible situation was about to get dramatically worse. And so that's when I really kind of started my deep dive into this topic, and, started really trying to learn all I could just through different resources and online, addiction recovery programs. And through the process, I got trained as a certified sex addiction therapist. And so we're continuing in collegiate ministry, but we really saw this need to develop this discipleship resource for men. And so that's really what we started doing. Started the study and investigation of it in 2007. We launched it in 2017. After that, those 10 years of really learning what's out there, what's working, what's biblical, what's gospel centered, and what's effective. And so we launched the Freedom Fight in 2017, and been running ever since with it.
Yeah, Ted, and I was in another group of men that were going through the Freedom Fight, the 30-day challenge. And I'll tell you, I was immediately intrigued, but it wasn't, one, I think the numbers are pretty shocking. And those are the numbers we know, right? Those are the men and even the women that will share that they're struggling. So you can automatically increase that number by what percent, I have no idea, but it's greater. But the numbers are shocking. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit, but also I was completely intrigued because it's not, you just said you became certified in sex addiction. And I think a lot of people that look at porn, one of the biggest problems with it is they minimize it so much. They minimize not only the action of it, but they minimize the impact in the brain. And that was the part going through the study, that the brain impact, I was completely blown away by that. And so a lot there, and we're going to get into all that because it's fascinating. But if you don't mind, let's talk about some of the root, like some of the numbers and why this is not only pervasive, but it's getting worse.
Yeah. Well, and and a lot of people don't realize that before 2006, because it's important to recognize what makes today's pornography different than the way it used to be. But before 2006, most of the pornography people were looking at were photographs. And you could download a video, but it took a while because of dial-up and all that. But after 06, with high-speed internet, and then with the smartphone in 07, the amount of pornography, videos, hardcore videos that are available, it's an endless buffet. But then when you combine that with the adolescent brain, which is more susceptible to addictive substances, porn changes a person's brain. And you went through the 30-day challenge, and we hit on some of that in there in our main program, which is a 6-month program. We go even into more depth, but man, it changes the brain. And as you said, we learn to train ourselves to deny, minimize, and rationalize, and our struggle with pornography. And as the scripture says, in Jeremiah, it says, the heart is deceitful above all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? But we deceive ourselves. And so, it's a challenging, component. But what I've seen, David, is when people start understanding the brain science behind their addiction, it actually gives them hope that they can find freedom. Because it helps them understand it's not, hey, it's not because you're a worthless pervert that you can't break free. Man, your mind has been changed. And so there's important factors to understand about the brain science that, help us renew our minds. As the scripture tells us that transformation happens by renewing our minds. And when we understand the brain science piece of it, it helps us renew our minds more effectively.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll just give you one, because I'll forget it, but the day, I forget what day it was, maybe it was like day 8 or 10 or something like that, where you go through a meditation on that verse, the exercise we meditate. I'll tell you, I've got squirrel brain, man. I'm all over the place, been trying to do meditation for a long time. That was the most effective, hugely blessed time of meditation that I've ever had, that exercise. So I just want to share that with you, because there's probably not even like the intent of that's not a focus of the 30-day challenge, but that was such a huge meditation day for me, and it was all driven by that verse, and your guys' focus on that. So I just want to give you kudos on that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. So, I'm interested because, you talked about 2007, the iPhone came out and kind of the internet world really, really gained traction. And I remember as a kid, a young adolescent, teenager, when the parents would go away and I was left at home, I'd sneak into my stepdad's closet, and I knew he had a stack of, Playboys, right? And that was really like the only thing that I could do to learn that and get that, fix. But now, like you said, you can just, a kid can take a phone and get onto Google and search in, naked girls, and it's there immediately. And, I saw on your website, like, this pornography is a $100 billion industry.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's growing at a massive rate. So, like, how do we battle this? Like, how do we fight this? Because it seems like just you can't stop it. So how do we get to the root of the issue? So that's one question. Like, how do we stop it? And two, like, maybe before that is what's the real issue? Like, what's the root issue of why men and even boys get addicted to this stuff?
Yeah, well, man, those are some great questions. And I would say, on the why question, it's kind of multi-layered because, hey, we understand about, hey, it's in our DNA that, men like to look at naked women. That's how God created us. That's the joy of sex, man, within marriage is, man, how God created us. Part of that is men are stimulated by sight. And so, that obviously is the surface level. But man, there's multiple layers about how a person gets addicted. Because, hey, the sex, the curiosity, man, that natural level. And I'll just give you one because, and we can explore some of the others, but, as we mentioned earlier, man, the addicted brain, man, when the brain gets hooked and you start building certain pathways in your brain, that, man, you can just start doing things, when you guys drove to the office today, for instance, you didn't really have to think about it because you had done it so many times. It was just automatic. Well, man, that happens at a deep level with porn. But, one of the things that makes it go deeper is when somebody starts using their addictive substance. This goes for any addiction. But when a person starts using their addictive substance to medicate the pain and discomforts of life, like negative emotions, for instance, man, that's when the addiction goes deep. So as an example, if I start using pornography to numb out and medicate stress in my life, and I do that repeatedly, then the next time I'm stressed, my brain actually releases dopamine to start the craving for porn. Because the brain goes into relief mode. Hey, I know where we can go to feel a whole lot better. And so a lot of guys will think, man, this huge urge to use porn hit me out of nowhere. But when we go back and look at it, it's typically an emotional trigger, whether that's stress, anxiety, fear, self-doubting. But man, that it triggers because we've been using it to medicate. And so, during 2020, during, the height of the pandemic, drug use, alcohol use, porn use, binge eating, all jumped way up. Why? Because we were stressed. We were lonely. We were, and man, those were medications. And man, this is a very potent, easily accessible and free medication. And that's one of the reasons that makes it addictive is when we start using it, man, to medicate the negative emotions. And most guys, man, have no idea that that's going on below the surface.
And for those that are listening, Ted held up his phone and said, like, this is, and I did too, like the phone, the free, the quick access to the internet and the Google search. That's the main problem going on. And Ted, we talked before we hit record about intimacy. And in our mastermind group, Storehouse Mastermind, one of the sections that we discussed for a month currently is titled romance, but I think we're going to change it to intimacy because I think intimacy is more of the deep meaning there. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think, you were talking about that could be a root cause as well of not having that intimacy in our lives.
Yeah. Well, and, another root besides the addicted brain, negative emotions, another one is isolation. Which is basically the opposite of intimacy. And here's the interesting thing. If you guys went through the training to be a certified sex addiction therapist. One of the things that you would realize is a porn or a sex addiction is classified as an intimacy disorder. When people don't have, intimacy in their normal everyday lives, the fake intimacy of pornography, has a huge draw. And so, as you think about the implications of that, and I'll unpack that a little bit, we were made for intimacy with God, intimacy with others. And when that's lacking, the fake intimacy of pornography is a huge draw of it. And again, most guys have no idea that that's part of what is drawing them. And so as an example, I'm was leading this group, Freedom Fight group, and a number of the guys in the group, as they were going back and looking, hey, what is it that's triggering me? It was when they felt rejected. It was when they felt they had self-doubt. And pornography became a place they could go to feel accepted. In the fantasy of porn, the actresses always wanted them. They felt enough. They felt significant. And they, developed this connection. A lot of guys, they'll develop a connection with a particular actress, a particular scene that, hey, I want to return to and finish with this scene. And part of the issue is we know oxytocin is the bonding chemical that helps a person bond. Well, oxytocin is released during climax. And so when guys are watching porn and masturbating and experiencing climax, they are bonding, to the actresses, the actors in these porn scenes. And so it's taking place, at a emotional level, at a chemical level, this bonding. And, therapists actually call this dating porn, that when people start developing this emotional connection. And so if you think about it, just, these two things that, porn has become a place that, you can go to for medication, and it brings relief from your emotional stress. It brings a place of comfort and significance, of bonding, of this fake intimacy. And all of this is happening at the subconscious level. Most guys, until they start, trying to break free and pulling back the layers, they don't really know this is going on. But that's what makes, porn, such a powerful thing and a difficult thing to break free from.
Yeah, you hit a bunch there, and I'll tell you, I think one of the things that is most fascinating, but also provides the greatest amount of hope, is that most of us are doing things, and I related out as I was going through the 30-day. I was also looking at other things I struggle with, like eating, right? Eating for comfort, and I'll eat super clean for a long time, and then there's a someone will make some cookies, and I'm like, well, I'll have a cookie, but then I have like 10 cookies. I'm like, why do I have 10 cookies? I feel terrible. That's not what I want. And I'll tell you, the knowledge, like when you talked about, we went through things like the addiction cycle, for example, where, the fantasy, routine, acting out, and guilt and shame, and then how those then it's a continuous cycle. It's an infinite cycle, because once you go through that cycle and that guilt and shame, well, then that pushes you back into the fantasy to escape the guilt and shame, and it starts a whole thing over again. But I'll tell you, going through and getting knowledge of a process like that, understanding mentally, doesn't free you, but it gives you hope to be able to attack at a very tactical level these things and to break that chain. So maybe my routine, as you dig into it, is I pick up my phone. Okay, here's a tip, put the phone away when I do whatever, when I feel a certain way, and that could completely break it. And then brace and all these different tools. I found there to be an amazing amount of hope in that. And if you could talk a little bit about that, but I also want you to touch on the brain chemistry was extremely enlightening to me. Like no kidding, it looks like your brain when you're on hard drugs like heroin. The pictures of the brain, the similarities in the pictures of the brain between heroin and porn addiction was just absolutely, I'd never seen that before. So if you could talk just a little bit about kind of really, no kidding, the physical things that it does to the brain, and then the process that you get into to break these things, which I think brings a lot of hope.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And and thinking through, again, the brain science piece, two important, aspects of the brain with an addiction that's important to understand is, the limbic system, which is sometimes called the emotional brain, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain, which is called the logical brain. And so, when a person, starts, stress, you talked about, hey, we can, cope with a lot of things, eating, whatever it might be. But when a person starts, their emotions start driving their addictive, behavior, one of the things that's fascinating is, when a person has been using their addictive substance, whether that's heroin or, cocaine or porn, the front part of the brain are the brakes. That's where we make moral decisions. It's where we have impulse control. This is where, we decide between good and bad based on future goals. And so these are our brakes. But what they found is when someone's using their addictive substance, this part of the brain actually shrinks. So think about that. Your ability to say no to yourself, man, gets, it's shrinking literally. But when a person stops their addictive substance for 6 months, this part of the brain actually starts growing back. And so when this happens, the limbic system, the emotional brain, man, that's what's running the show. The brakes are off, but a person is driven by their emotions that, hey, I'm stressed. Okay, I know where I can go to feel better. That becomes the dominant factor. And so what we do is, try to help people. Hey, how can we, get the prefrontal cortex engaged in the process? And, we teach brace, but man, a simple yet profound tool, to begin, people finding freedom by addressing, man, that addicted brain piece. Yeah, if you like the brain piece in the 30-day challenge, we unpack that even more in the main program. And then what was the second question, David, that you asked?
It was just the process oriented nature of overcoming some of these issues and just for context, brace out there. So brace is breathe, which is awesome, right? You just, breathe, to stop for a second, take a deep breath, breathe, kind of try to get out of that cycle. The R being reflected on truth, which in this case was, the renewing of the mind and, or some verse of freedom. AC is the accountability call. So that's a big one, right? Like if you get to the AC part, if you're committed to doing this and you're about to act out, and your new habit is to pick up your phone and call a buddy, like that usually tends to put a little bit of water on the fire. That's the BRAC, and then the E. Did I say E?
Yeah.
What's the E?
Escape, isolation. Escape. Yeah. So leaving the tempting situation, and and one of the because we have a Freedom Fight app, and on the app we have an I'm triggered button, and so when you hit that, it automatically goes to your accountability, and And so that's been a really powerful thing. And, one of the things we have, again, it's all free. Our programs are free. The app is free. But one of the things on the app that guys do is check in on a daily basis. And so just taking 2 to 3 minutes, to go through the app, check in, and you send that, answer a few questions and send it to your accountability partner. But that's really, proven to be, just critical in helping men grow in their emotional awareness and just beginning to identify their triggers. But to put some of these things into practice. And so, to answer your question, understanding the process, is huge. And as you mentioned, just recognizing, hey, I typically go to fantasy first, and then I have a routine, something I do to set the table to act out. And so for most people, it's like, okay, hey, I'm stressed. Man, I start fantasizing. Then I go to my room with my phone. And so all of a sudden it's like, man, when I'm stressed, I don't need to be alone. And so when you start unpacking it, you can start taking action that, man, has real life consequence. Like, all right, man, I'm stressed. I need to make a call to a buddy. All right. Hey, I need to go to a coffee shop. I don't need to go home and be alone because I know where that's going to end. And so all of those, understanding the process can really help us navigate at a higher level, to be more effective at, setting up boundaries and to ultimately walk in freedom.
So what's the big deal? So I hear, I could see like, one of our listeners being like, hey, so what? I'm a good Christian man. I love my wife and I love my kids and I go to church and, hey, if I look at porn every now and then, maybe I, got denied by my wife and I'll look at it, every now and then, once a month or once a week or something like that. What's the big deal? Like, what is the long-term impact on a man that is addicted to the porn and has this habit? Like, what's the big deal?
Man, Stu, that's such a great question. And,
Thank you, David. Did you hear that? That's a great question.
Well,
hey, Ted, I also want to thank you because most of our guests, I think you may be the first guest that's ever said Stu. That's a great question.
Well, one of the things that, is interesting just, about this is, man, the self-deception piece that, David, hit on earlier, but man, is key. Because I've heard men say, man, I'm actually serving my wife to watch porn because, she's kind of busy and, man, she's got the kids crawling all over, but they self-deceive to, it's like, I'm actually serving my wife. The thing is, man, it's really the old adage of the frog in the boiling pot of water. Man, it happens so slowly that, man, you get cooked while the whole time you're telling yourself it's okay. Because 1 Peter 2:11 says, as aliens and strangers, abstain from fleshly lust, which wage war against the soul. But if you think about that verse, as God was describing the impact of fleshly lust, like pornography, on a person, he used warfare imagery, and he says it's waging war against the deepest part of who we are. And this is one of the deceptive pieces of this is we can tell ourselves, man, I love my wife, love my kids, and hey, I go to church, and man, I'm not missing a beat. And no one has to know about my porn habit. Because a guy in that situation isn't going to call it a porn addiction. He's just going to call it, hey, it's my porn habit. Just use it to relieve stress and, serve my wife. But the fact is, man, it's waging war against the soul. There was a fascinating study done by a sociology professor at OU. He studied 3,000 people over a 6-year period of time. And he looked at the impact of pornography. And what he found is, man, porn is waging war on multiple fronts. That one of the areas he said, any porn use is associated with declines in religious commitments, like going to church, reading your Bible, praying. And it's also associated with increases in religious doubts. So think about it. If you wanted Christians to be less committed to going to church, reading their Bible, praying, and you wanted them to doubt more, just get them to watch porn. And so, man, the impact is undeniable, but it also is waging war against parent marriages. Dr. Perry said, in that 6-year study, if either the husband or wife started watching pornography, that couple was 2 to 3 times more likely to divorce in the next 2 years than the porn-free couple, which is huge when you think about it. A couple that watches porn is 318% more likely to commit adultery because it's training the brain to want new and different sexual partners. That's what porn does. It trains the brain. So you can't, God's design is, man, being connected to one person in marriage, and man, enjoying that, more and more through the years. But porn is the opposite. It trains you to want new and different. And I'll give 2 more quick things from this study that I think continues to answer the question. But Dr. Perry's research found that, the more porn a parent watches, or the more frequently they watch porn, the more or the less likely they are to have spiritual conversations with their kids.
Wow.
And so you think about the impact. The guy who's watching porn, man, he's not going to be bringing up the scriptures and, man, investing in his kids and praying with his kids like the guy who's not. That's just reality. Again, this is a peer-reviewed research. And then finally, there was a direct correlation in this study between a man's service in his church and the frequency of his porn use. If a guy's not watching porn, Dr. Perry found there was a 1 in 3 probability that he'd serve in his church. If he started watching porn monthly, it went from a 1 in 3 probability to a 1 in 10. If he started watching porn weekly, it dropped to 1 in 20. And so, we're in a spiritual battle, and we have an enemy that's using porn to reach into Christian homes and churches and capture the hearts and minds of the next generation, to capture it of men. And one of the saddest things that I've seen, guys, is a teenage son who's struggling with porn himself actually approaching his dad about wanting help, and his Christian dad doesn't have anything to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough,
because the Christian dad himself is struggling.
He's doing it too.
Man, yeah, he's in this shame factor. Man, his family is being annihilated, and man, he's been slow cooked in porn the whole time, telling himself, man, it's not a big deal. Rationalizing, minimizing, and denying. And that's why one of my friends who actually lost his church, his marriage, and his family to a pornography addiction, he calls pornography Satan's masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how deceptive and, man, how destructive. But then no one wants to talk about it. The church isn't dealing with it, and it's like, man, it's complete, spiritual warfare at a massive level. Where are spiritual leaders that are addressing this issue?
Hey, Stu, before your question,
Yeah.
one thing, if you happen to be an individual, and we ask this question a lot in the mastermind, if you happen to be an individual who says, I'm helping my wife out, our recommendation is ask her.
Yeah.
Ask her if she thinks your porn habit is helping her, because that's the real way to judge that. And if she says yes, then that's a different conversation. And there's an addiction thing maybe as a couple, but the first step is ask. If you don't think it's an impactful, then ask that person, particularly your wife. And I think that'll be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that porn or any habit usually does not get less extreme. It's the opposite. You start and it may be little and it may be just Playboy pictures. And a lot of times that ends in some extremely high level of, sometimes even legally dubious situation, because you constantly need, like any drug, more and more and more extreme. And so it's playing with fire, to your point, Ted. It's always playing with fire, no matter how minimal you may think it is.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, David, it's interesting that in the book of Ephesians, in chapter 4, verse 19, when Paul is describing, he's writing to the Ephesian believers who are stuck in sexual bondage like the Gentiles around them. First century Rome was a very hypersexualized culture, but he actually describes what you just talked about, because when he describes them, he says they're greedy to practice every kind of impurity, which is a really unique difference about a sex or a porn addiction from, when a person reaches a point of tolerance with drugs or alcohol, they need more. But with a porn addiction or a sex addiction, you don't just need more, you need different. And the different is a little more extreme, a little more taboo, a little more forbidden. In the porn industry, man, that's the algorithm they use. It's, okay, normal porn, okay, maybe a little bit of violence, and and it's like, how do people get into all of this, the rape porn, and just all kinds of stuff? And we're seeing, man, young people struggling with bestiality at a level we've never seen before. Well, that is following, exactly what Paul said. Man, when a person starts down this path, it's this insatiable appetite. They're greedy to practice every kind of impurity. They can't get enough. And, unfortunately, we're just on the front end of this tsunami, all this, gender confusion that's out there. Man, we're on the front end of that thing. But one of the major factors driving that, man, is porn. And again, most people, man, don't recognize, that element of it.
Ted, it's funny you mentioned that Bible verse. David and I are going through the Bible in a year together on the Bible app, and we literally, today's reading was Ephesians 4.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I pulled it up. Ephesians 4, 17 through 19. With the Lord's authority, I say this: live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives, because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. Pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful.
Well, and then next verse 20 is, that is not how you learn Christ.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of hope in that, because, man, Paul is addressing this group of believers, man, who are living like the world in their sexual behavior. And, he doesn't, he's not shaming them. He's reminding them of, hey, this is not who you are, man, in Christ. Man, you have a different life. And so there's a lot of hope, in that, for sure.
Yeah. Something that I was thinking about as you were talking about kind of what the big deal is. I early on in my marriage, I was looking at pornography, and, we'd be out to dinner, or we'd be out on a walk, or we'd be out in public somewhere. And my wife, she would catch me looking at other women. Like she would she would see my eyes go astray and look, somewhere else. And, this is kind of me getting a little bit vulnerable here, but she would call me out, and like, it would hurt her. It would hurt her like in a deep place to know that, she's seeing me look at other women in a sexual way. And that had a major impact on me, because that was just something I was just doing without even really thinking about it.
Yeah.
And that's before we had children. And, thankfully I've gotten past that addiction, but like, I could just see and think about, like, what if my kids saw me doing that, and how would that impact them? And, the Storehouse Mastermind, we're all about empowering men to become the best dads, the best husbands. And, how impactful as a father to their son, unknowingly, to teach them that it's okay to look sexually at other women and not their mother, not,
some doing it knowingly, dude. Some
Fair.
are I grew up in a house, and God rest his soul, my dad, that was a normal encouragement. Like,
Yeah.
son, look at that.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I grew up.
Yeah.
And so that level of, or lack of, self-awareness and literally putting fire into your kids' hands is next. A lot of people do that. A lot of us do that.
Yeah. And Ted, we did a retreat, a men's retreat here in Colorado in September. Like 15 guys got together, and we stayed at this Airbnb up in the mountains and just kind of hung out and, went for a hike and did some fun things. And one of the men in the group afterwards, he said to us, kind of on a sidebar conversation, he's like, guys, this is the first time I've been with a group of men where conversations like, ooh, look at the girl in the hot yoga pants, or, pulling out the phone and looking at, pictures or whatever. He's like, this is the first time that I knew for a fact that this wouldn't happen in a group of men like this, because it's so prevalent. Like, it's so much out there that if you surround yourself with a group of men, more than likely there might be that conversation of, oh, look at that girl, or, hey, check this out. Right. And it's so interesting and so sad at the same time that this is where we are in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and, and one of, thinking through the roots of addiction, the most obvious is the sexualized society. What we're talking about is, man, sex is everywhere. It's been the conversations, the triggers, and, and that's the most obvious of the roots. And it's, really just about access. And then again with the smartphone, you could imagine if you were a cocaine addict and you were trying to break free, but you always had a baggie of cocaine in your front pocket.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that we have laws in place to keep addictive substances away from adolescents, because the adolescent brain is just much more moldable and shapeable to addictive substances. So if a person, and the stats bear this out, if a person gets addicted to a substance before they're 18, the chances that it becomes a lifelong struggle go way up. And so when you think about that in terms of, handing a 12-year-old a smartphone, it just puts it in a whole new perspective. And, and that's one of the things that, and I'm talking about, Christian, committed Christians, when I ask them a lot of times, hey man, so what are you doing to, block your kids' phones? And they'll be like, what are you talking about? It's like, it hasn't even entered their mind. But man, I'm, working with college students, young adult men, I don't know how many testimonies I've heard is, man, hey, I got exposed when I was this age, but man, at age 11 or 12, when my parents gave me a smartphone, man, that's when my addiction started. Daily for an hour a day, man, for the last 10 years. man, that is a very common story. But what most parents don't realize is, man, the adolescent brain is more deeply impacted by addictive substances and porn and the dopamine high that porn creates. Man, it's massive. And so, man, and again, on our website, going through our program, we teach people, hey, this is how you lock up a phone, and there are ways to do it, to whitelist it, and steps you can take. And so it's a very holistic approach, and it has to be, because as you guys alluded to earlier, man, it's everywhere. And what we've really seen in addressing this issue is, man, it's not just a problem to address, but it truly is an incredible opportunity for deep growth in discipleship. As you begin to help men, because the commitment level, the surrendered level, and the amount of authenticity that has to take place, the depth of relationships that between accountability partners that, man, is forged from men fighting this together, man, it's incredible. And because one of the things we talk about is, hey, you don't just overcome a porn habit or addiction, but you must outgrow it, because you have to grow in significant areas of your life. But man, the growth is amazing, and man, it brings so much blessing, man, to marriages, to just the family, to leadership in general. Man, there's just, man, so many benefits and blessings that come as a result of growing in these key areas.
Yeah, and I've always found that accountability is the best way to, whether it's working out, eating right, or overcoming a porn addiction. And you verified that. And what's interesting, and I was thinking about the example Stu gave. I was thinking about it at the exact same time he was, but from a slightly different context. And that was the accountability piece, right? It was the fact that there were a group of men together, and we didn't even explicitly we weren't even talking about in that particular day, or that retreat wasn't focused around intimacy. We were talking about performance and things like that, but it was just the level of accountability within the group that's been established. It was just a given. It was a known that was not an action that was welcome in the group, but it wasn't taboo. It's not, we wouldn't talk about it. It just wasn't, it didn't fit. Yeah. And I think because the accountability of the group, and so what I want to emphasize is, I think, something like this, it's a very, we believe porn addiction to be a very shameful, isolated in the sense of we are isolated, personal thing. But as soon as you do take that step to be vulnerable and open up about it, it changes the entire dynamic, and it releases the hold of power that it has on us, because we now, and what typically happens is, hey man, I just am so embarrassed to share this. And usually the dude you share it with is like, oh yeah, dude. Yeah. I also struggle with this. And then the next guy will be like, well, I have overcome this. And the next guy is, well, I'm getting into this. Like, this is not something that we should feel, so much shame that we don't share. That accountability piece is the jet fuel that to get towards freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, as Paul talked about in 2 Timothy 2:22, but flee youthful lust and pursue faith, righteousness, and love with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. And so, when Paul was saying, hey, man, you need to flee this, but you need to flee it with other men who are also, man, seeking this with a pure heart. And no one gets free on their own. And again, man, there's, man, so many lies the enemy tells us to keep us in the shadows. Another big one is, man, if people really knew what I was doing and looking at, man, they would completely reject me. And that's what keeps so many people in the shadows, denying, minimizing, and rationalizing. And so I would just, encourage your listeners, man, if they find themselves in this, man, believe what God promises in his word in James 5:16, therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Man, the first step to healing is confession and bringing it into the light. And when we bring it into the light, just as you said, David, God uses that not just in our life, but all of a sudden other guys are encouraged, man, to be honest. And, you just got to look at the stats. Somebody you confess to, there's probably a pretty good chance that he has struggled or he is struggling, man, with the same thing. And so, man, I just, want to encourage your listeners, man, taking that step to confess to a trusted friend, man, is, an important, man, step to finding healing and freedom.
Ted, how can people find out more about what you're doing? I know you wrote a book. Talk about the book that you wrote, and then tell our audience where they can get more information on your program and the Freedom Fight.
Yeah. The book, The Freedom Fight. Basically the first third of the book just talks about the brutal realities of porn's impact. And so, man, just looking at the brain, man, relationships, marriages, and just looking at, man, porn's impact. The second 2/3 of the book unpacks the 6 roots of a porn or sex addiction, and really looking at, man, how to address these roots. And so we hit on some of that today. And then our website, thefreedomfight.org, we have a number of, resources. Our main program is a, 6-month discipleship program. I really encourage guys to start with the 30-day challenge that David went through. And so you can go onto our website and find it. But I would encourage you, because it really is easy to share it. You get the link for the 30-day challenge and you send it out to a buddy or maybe even a group of guys and say, hey guys, I'm going through this 30-day challenge. Why don't you join me? And then each day you can just start a group text and share what we learned for that day's, it's 10 minutes or less of content each day. But then it just gets guys to start talking about it. A lot of guys will do groups, that they'll meet once a week for 5 weeks to go through the 30-day challenge. And, but it's something simple, but man, it can be and I've seen guys use that. Just, it's like, hey, I've never talked to, this friend or this group of friends about porn, but man, hey, I'm just going to, man, throw it out. It's like, hey man, let's go through this together. And it de-shames the topic, man. It starts helping them understand the brain science behind it. And man, it just gives the group to, just some good stuff to talk about. So all of that is, on our website. All of it's free. And you can check it out there.
That's awesome. I really appreciate it. We'll put all that information in the show notes. Ted, this was an amazing conversation, a very powerful one, very important one. And we appreciate you coming on and spending an hour with us to talk through this stuff. I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. And guys and gals, hey, reach out to Ted. Check out thefreedomfight.org. Go buy his book and read through that. And, this is something that we're talking about inside the Storehouse Mastermind. And so if this is something that you need help with, obviously go to Ted, but reach out to Dave and I too. We'd be happy to talk through some of this stuff, because we've been there, we've done that. And we're a man just like you are, and we're fighting it. So, Ted, thanks for showing up. Thanks for coming today.
Absolutely, guys. Great to be with you.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Ted. And hey, just an encouragement to you, man. You're changing men's lives. You won't know the full measure till you get to heaven, man. It's there's probably millions of dudes out there that are going through the program, and you'll never know a thing about it until you get to heaven, dude. So I'm just so grateful for you. So grateful for your heart to bring light to this. So grateful for you bringing a path towards freedom, dude. I just absolutely love it. Fired up about it. Exciting. The 30-day challenge was incredible. Super eye-opening. I really enjoyed it. Tons and tons of pages of notes. You say it's 10 minutes of content. I think I had another hour of inputs after that every day, but it was great. It was just very eye-opening for me. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. So glad you came on with us, and look forward to continuing the relationship and chatting. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, David. I appreciate it, man.
All right, guys and gals, check it out. Hey, share this episode if this was powerful to you. Reach out. Links are in the show notes. And most important, go fill the storehouse.
Make a great day, friends. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, Ted.
All right.
Hey, I don't know about you, but that was a pretty powerful conversation. And it has motivated me to really just help others to learn what a problem this is, because it's such an issue in today's society. The education and all of the information that we got today was powerful, man.
Yeah. And hey, the bottom line is we're men of action. We want to do something about these things that are holding us prisoner, right? So sex addiction, pornography, overeating, bad relationships, all these things that are holding us prisoner. One of the best things to do about it is to join with other men and walk together to not only bring light to be educated about, but also to overcome a lot of these strongholds, a lot of these things that are holding us back from our best and our highest. And so, dude, this fired me up. I love the education part of it. Even more so, I love the action items. And the cherry on top for me is the validation that doing this together in fellowship and with other men is the most effective way to overcome some of our biggest challenges and some of our biggest downfalls, which is absolutely incredible. And it fires me up about the mastermind.
For sure, man. Yeah, this is the stuff we're talking about. We are intentional about having hard conversations, getting vulnerable, and opening up to other men, because surprise, surprise, if you open up and we're vulnerable, there's going to be somebody else that says, oh yeah, hey, me too. Let's work on this together, right? So if you're interested in something like this, hey, join us. Storehouse310.com/mastermind. There's a big join now button. Hit that thing, apply, and come join us just to be intentional about working through this stuff. We have amazing conversations, and there are pretty rad dudes in this, excluding David, but there's some pretty rad dudes in this stuff.
And more comments from Stu on a future Dumb Dudes, because he's dumb. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Filling the Storehouse. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe and share it with someone you love. And if you really felt inspired, leave a 5-star review so we could continue to grow and help other Christian entrepreneurs fill their storehouse. If you're interested in creating financial freedom through real estate investing, be sure to check out our website at storehouse310turnkey.com. We'd love to serve you through our platform of building the kingdom. Just click on the contact link and we'll reply to you as soon as we can. Again, thanks so much for listening. Now go fill your storehouse and make it a great day.